Hey, this is Matt once again. Welcome back to another video. It's another paid request, this time for Jonathan. Thank you so much for that. And for those interested in requesting any type of videos, topics, commentaries, reactions, tier lists, randomness, whatever it may be, feel free to send it either directly to my PayPal or join my Patreon. Both links are down below in the info box. And Jonathan wanted me to review Scooby-Doo Pirates Ahoy from 2006. Now, I'm going to get into my history with Scooby-Doo, but before I do, I'll get further into it later on, but long story short, this was a harmless movie. If you have kids, it's a little over an hour long, doesn't take too much of your time. Casey Kasem, this is one of the films where he came back as the voice of Shaggy. He's the original voice of Shaggy. That's always nice to hear. As much as I think Matthew Lillard does a great job voicing Shaggy, this is actually before he started doing it in the animated films, which I'll get to. Casey Kasem to me will always be Shaggy. So like I said, it was nice to hear him. Of course, he sounds a lot older because when Scooby-Doo started was like the late 60s. So it's been a few decades, but like I said, always welcome to hear his voice. It does follow a lot of the cliches of Scooby-Doo, the formula, I should say. You have the bit where the door dad, as I call it, where they enter one door, but then they appear out of another one, and they're going, and the villain's chasing them, and they go in and out of different doors as if they're teleporting. If you've seen Scooby-Doo, you know what I'm talking about. You also have the bit where there's going to be someone in a mask, and you find out why they were steering people off. It does try to put some songs into it, kind of like the old show. But the old show, back in the day, those songs had a bit more of a quirky feel to them because of the era of the 60s that they were being made in. Here, the songs just sound awful, at least in this movie. I would say that was some of the worst parts was the songs. At least have the songs be worth a spit. Here, the songs I thought were just awful. There are some familiar voices in the supporting roles. Fred of the group, this deals with his parents, and his dad is voiced by Tim Conway. Guy's been in a lot of stuff, did a lot of stuff with Don Knotts back in the day, among other movies and TV work. And then the mom is voiced by Edie McClurg. She was the secretary to the principal in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She's also has that great scene in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at the airport where Steve Martin throws the ultimate F-bomb in cinema history, and her line is, "You're fucked." That's Edie McClurg. She's been in other stuff too. You also have Arsenio Hall voicing the captain of this cruise ship. Ron Perlman is a voice. Dan Castellaneta is also a voice. Dan Castellaneta, voice of Homer Simpson and many other characters on The Simpsons. I think there's another voice as well. I think Kathy Najimy, who was one of the nuns in Sister Act, she was one of the three witches in Hocus Pocus 1 and 2. She has a voice in this. So, did some recognizable people. Freddie Rodriguez, who was in Planet Terror as El Rey. He has a voice performance in this. By the way, going back to Arsenio Hall, it's kind of funny that Frank Welker, who voices Fred, and they got Arsenio Hall, so it's almost like the real Ghostbusters reunion. But, I mean, it's... Again, I'm going to get into my history of Scooby-Doo in a bit, but the plot... Fred's parents get Fred this gift for a birthday. The Dane goes along with, and it's to go on a cruise ship. Trying to find out it's a mystery cruise ship. I did like the bit that Arsenio Hall and I think Kathy Najimy, who worked on the cruise, they like to do these mysteries, but the Dane solves the mysteries really quickly to the detriment of the other customers being upset. Oh, I'm sorry, we're used to this stuff. So other people are pissed off that they solve the mysteries way too quickly. But then they see a guy out in the water, voiced by Freddie Rodriguez. They bring him on. He talks about there's these ghost pirates. And at the beginning of the film, we see this fog come in and wreck his ship and take the people who are with him. He warns people, but some of the gang think, oh, this is another part of one of those mysteries on this mystery cruise ship. The fog comes in. These ghost pirates chase everyone, kidnap pretty much everyone except the Dane and Freddie Rodriguez. They also take Fred's parents. At one point, they're chasing down the pirate ship. They get shot at. The boat sinks. They get to an island. They find that this is where the pirates are, and they want Fred Rodriguez because he could lead them to where they need to go, or something to do with this meteor. I'll get to that near the end. Also involves a hypnotist. Like I said, it's one of those films where the animation is average for a direct-to-video film. The voice work, Frank Welker has voiced Fred for the longest time, so him and Casey Kasem, nice to have them back as Fred and Shaggy. You have other voices for Velma and Daphne. Frank Welker also voices Scooby-Doo. And the thing of it is, the original voice of Scooby-Doo was Don Messick. Sadly passed away, I forget what year it was. I want to say the late 90s, somewhere around there. Mid to late 90s. Because the last time I remember hearing him as Scooby-Doo was A Pup Named Scooby-Doo. And that was early, they went into the early 90s. Don Messick, to me, he's the voice of Scooby-Doo. Anytime I hear someone else try to voice Scooby-Doo, it just doesn't sound right. It just doesn't sound right. And it just takes me a bit out of it. And that's the title character. I know it's not fair, because like, what? So just don't do any more Scooby-Doo? I know that's not fair. It's just, as a guy who was a fan of those old Scooby-Doo stuff, again, anytime I hear someone else trying to do Scooby-Doo, it just doesn't sound right. Matthew Lillard does a good job voicing Shaggy, but I don't know, just no one can quite get the Scooby-Doo voice right, at least for me. Maybe they do okay or so-so, but just one of those things for me. So before I go further with the movie, like I say, it's a harmless film. It's over an hour long. It's nice to have some of those familiar voices on the supporting cast. And the direct-to-video market of Scooby-Doo is fairly successful. I think there's like 37 or 38 direct-to-video movies. I think the last one, there's like 2 that came out last year, I believe. So I would not be surprised if one comes out this year sometime. But I remember watching the Scooby-Doo Where Are You show back in the day on VHS tape. My aunt would send us, the family, many tapes because we didn't have cable. We only had like 3 or 4 channels. She did, so she would send us a lot of these tapes of various cartoons or shows or things of that nature. One was like a full stint of Scooby-Doo. And it would be like Scooby-Doo Where Are You, or some of the later bits, the new Scooby-Doo Adventures, or Scooby-Doo Mysteries. Scooby-Doo Where Are You was about 3 seasons long. I think the 3rd season, like they started using maybe bits from older shows and reused animation. But I do remember enjoying them. Now, yes, it's a very formulaic show. Like, when you watch them again and again and again in a marathon, you kind of get a bit... It runs a bit thin because, like you said, it's a formula that can only go so far. And so it becomes more and more routine. But I remember enjoying that mystery aspect, enjoying the voices, especially Scooby and Shaggy. Shaggy was actually my favorite character from back then. But yeah, that only lasted 3 years. But then they like did all these other. I don't know why they just made that last 3 years if it was so successful. Then they did like all these other different shows with the same characters. I'm like, why didn't you just have the same show and just keep going on for 7, 8, 9, 10 years? But it was just a different format back in the day. And there's a lot of like interpretations. I wish somehow, and some of them did get physical releases, but some of them didn't, or they did, but then they were just put into random packs, spooky Scooby-Doo tales or blah blah blah. And if you try to get them, this and this have some of the same episodes, but this has 3 episodes that are different, and these have 2 episodes that have never been released. That's a clusterfuck, is what I'm getting at. Just becomes a clusterfuck. But throughout the years, I remember there was the Scooby-Doo show, which had Scooby being chased by a shark at the beginning. Why you stick around till the mystery is solved? Hang around with Scooby-Doo. I can't remember like which one was which, because again they did so many interpretations of it. I did Grind with the same voice cast, which is nice. Then later on they introduced a pup named that was much later, but Scrappy-Doo. Now a lot of people hate Scrappy-Doo. As the years go on, I'm indifferent on Scrappy-Doo. I could probably see myself even having said before, yeah, back in the day. That's why I thought it was kind of funny that he was the main villain in the live-action Scooby-Doo. I thought, okay, that was actually pretty interesting and clever. But at the same time, I didn't think it was as bad to be completely wiped out from history and never come back ever. And just be completely tied up and put into a vault. He's where Al Capone is. Not Al Capone. I took the Al Capone's vault from Geraldo. I meant to Jimmy Hoffa. Scrappy's where Jimmy Hoffa's at. Maybe they were in Al Capone's vault, and then someone took it out before Geraldo Rivera came in and found jack shit. That's why. Al Capone's vault was not empty at first. Scrappy-Doo and Jimmy Hoffa were in there. And then, oh shit, Geraldo, we gotta get away from him and his mustache. Get the fuck out. Put him in, I don't know, maybe the same warehouse that the Ark of the Covenant is. At the end of Raise the Lost Ark, maybe that's where Scrappy-Doo's at. And Jimmy Hoffa and, I don't know, fucking bits of Roswell and whatever the fuck else is missing. And I actually remember like some of those movies of Scrappy-Doo enjoying, like the Boo Brothers, Scooby-Doo meets the Boo Brothers, Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf. Those I quite enjoy. I would say those are some of my favorite Scooby-Doo movies. And yeah, it got a bit irritating if you see them in conjunction. Scrappy-Doo saying puppy power and all that stuff, but let's say if you rework the character a little bit, I think he could be definitely more tolerable. And I know there are some people who were fans of him, so again, to completely wipe the character out of existence and to have some of those episodes never released, so you have to go online to find collections of them, I think it's a bit lame. I know there was one called The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, where you had Vincent Price voicing a character named Van Gool. I think it was like Scooby, Shaggy, Scrappy, Daphne, and then this little kid named Flim Flam, who's like a con artist. And these ghosts were released, they had to get all the ghosts back. And apparently they did a movie finishing that, but I looked it up, and apparently they took a dump on that show where, oh, well, they didn't really get the last ghost, it was a con, and Velma says, you know what, actually probably none of that existed. You guys were all just hallucinating because of the mountains. And I'm like, what? Wow. If any of you are a fan of that show, they just took a fucking dump on it and retconned or other shit. I'm like, That just seems like shitty business. I remember there was another Scooby-Doo show that, and a lot of these only lasted 1 year, where the opening was kind of like thriller music, like monsters doing the thriller dance. I remember liking the music, and that's where you had Scooby, Shaggy, Daphne, and Scrappy. And maybe there's in one of those like a few appearances with Velma and Fred, like 2 or so episodes. There's the new Scooby-Doo mystery, the new Scooby-Doo movies where it was them teaming up with Don Knotts or Jonathan Winters or the Three Stooges or Batman and Robin or the Addams Family. Which I know they released a set, but I think they couldn't get all of them because of rights issues with some of the properties. So, I mean, there was a lot of interpretations, is what I'm saying. Then you get to the 90s, a pup named Scooby-Doo, which I remember, which is them as little kids. And I remember seeing that back in the day on Saturday morning cartoons. Which is strange to say because they don't have Saturday morning cartoons anymore. That's a long gone format. And then Scooby-Doo was kind of gone for a while. Because I think that ended like 91, and for about 10 years you didn't really have anything Scooby-Doo. Until ultimately in 1998 they brought back with direct-to-video animated films. Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. And there was no voice, different voice for Shaggy, different voice for Scooby. I think at one point Billy West for Ren and Stimpy voiced Shaggy. But then he didn't last long because he was busy doing Futurama and other stuff. So Scott Innes, Scott Innes, I-N-N-E-S, Scott Innes. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. He would voice both Scooby and Shaggy from like 1998 to 2001 until ultimately in 2003 Casey Kasem came back. In fact, there were 2 movies where the original cast of the original show came back to do the voices. Scooby, I mean not Scooby because that guy passed away. Shaggy, Velma, Daphne, and Frank Welker seems like he's always willing to do Fred. But yeah, the actresses who played Daphne and Velma came back. I think like Legend of the Vampire and one other movie. But after that, there were other different cast members. And Casey Kasem, I think, voiced about 9 with... Yeah, 2003 to 2010, Casey Kasem voiced 9 of the direct-to-video movies as Shaggy. But then he retired and sadly passed away a few years after. And then from 2011 onward, it was pretty much Matthew Lillard voicing Shaggy. Except for that movie Scoob, which for some reason they decided to do a different cast for that, which I thought was strange. And then that film didn't do much anyway, so it didn't matter to do that in the first place, but... And Matthew Lillard is a good voice for Shaggy. And of course he played the character in the live action films. Which the first one was a hit, but the second one was a pretty big bomb. I think Trick or Treat Scooby-Doo was the first animated movie Matthew Lillard voiced. But like I say, it's definitely still a popular venue for this character because... Like I said, there's been about 37 direct-to-video animated Scooby-Doo movies. Which that's a lot. Now, granted, I couldn't tell you most of them apart. Once in a while, it would be a real monster. Like, that was one of the selling points of Zombie Island. Hell, that was selling points of some of the older stuff, like Beats the Boo Brothers. Those ghosts were real. Shaggy turned to a werewolf and reluctant werewolf, so... To me, I'm like, okay, this isn't a new thing, but... That's something that was done all the time. And there were other TV shows as well. What's New Scooby-Doo and all sorts of stuff. And no, don't get me started on Velma. I have not seen Velma. I have not seen Velma, so. Now, as for the film itself, I know like 20 minutes in. Another thing I didn't mention about this movie, it takes place in the Bermuda Triangle, of course. So I said there's ghost pirates, Freddy Rodriguez's boat is taken over, he gets out of there. Meanwhile, the gang, again, it's Fred's birthday, Fred's parents get him and the gang this trip on this cruise. When they're solving these mysteries easily, you do get some nice Easter eggs. Captain Cutler, I always remember he had the cool looking deep dive outfit that would glow because of the seaweed. That was always one of the monsters I remember the most on the show, so it was nice to have an appearance from him. But again, they blew all the mysteries, so the rest of the customers are pissed off about that. There's a costume party, and Scooby and Shaggy don't know how to be dressed. At one point, they both dress as Velma and Daphne. I think that's the scariest part of the damn movie. Give people nightmares. I didn't mind the look of the fog when it came in. Reminded me a little bit of John Carpenter's The Fog. Maybe because The Fog and Ghost Pirates, so a little bit of that. The voices of Velma and Daphne, I wasn't really big on. Daphne is pretty much there to not really do a whole lot. At one point, they're being chased, and she stops to look at clothes for a second, and then they pull her along. Like I say, if it follows this formula, it doesn't really do anything that remarkable or that ingenious. I'll probably say some of the more fun bits is, again, hearing Casey Kasem voicing Shaggy once again. Fred's parents being very proud of their son, and Tim Conway and Edie McClure definitely seem like a sweet couple. I say it follows kind of the same type of stuff. A to B to C, they get on the island. And I've seen this happen a lot of the past episodes of those older shows where like they sit on something and then they sink down, it opens up a door, opens up a secret. Oh, good job, Scoob, or good job. In this case, good job, Scoob. Huh, what'd I do? It's just stuff I feel so familiar. I think that's kind of sadly one of the issues and problems with Scooby-Doo is that when you've seen enough of it, you've seen all of it. So, unless you do something either different like the live action Scooby-Doo was trying to do, or horrendous like everything I've heard of Velma, it's kind of hard to really shape the boundaries of this, of what this show is about. You do this stuff because it's familiar and it's a nod to the past, but if you've seen so much of this stuff, it just feels like familiar formula. And you find out at the end that the pirates were hypnotized by this guy, played by Dan Castellaneta. The reason being is to get this meteor, which he was able to convince Ron Perlman, oh, this will take you back through time, but that was bullshit. It's really because it's made of gold, and Dan Castellaneta wants the money. This meteor's made of gold. But then something's going on in the Bermuda Triangle, so they have to dump the meteor back into the water to calm things down. It's nice that Shaggy gets some nice moments. Like, for example, on the pirate ship. He's up top with a broom smacking pirates off. And when him and Scooby slide down, Shaggy's able to get the winning moment to make this boat swing and smack these pirates. So it's nice that Shaggy did some moments to shine. I mean, I can't really say there were moments that made me laugh or chuckle. It's more like smirk because, like I say, either stuff that remind me of the past, like Captain Cutler, or recognizable voices. Oh wow, Arsenio Hall is in this. Oh wow, this person's in this. Tim Conway, especially, I thought was rather sweet as Fred's dad. Like I said, the songs when they do some of these chase scenes are just outright awful. And I'm trying to remember when Pirates of the Caribbean came out. What year that came out. If maybe one of the reasons they did Pirates in this is because Pirates of the Caribbean also dealt with ghost pirates. So, I'm trying to remember what year that came out. I can't remember. So like I say, it's a harmless movie. It's familiar. It's not going to change the course, change the game in terms of Scooby-Doo films. Like I said, like I've repeated many times, nice to hear Casey Kasem back as Shaggy. It's only an hour and change, so like I say, if you have kids and you want to see something, like I said, there's no out of the blue juvenile jokes or fart jokes or anything of the sort, which is good for me that they don't have that shit in there. Like I said, the animation's average, although again, I think the way they made the fog roll in looked pretty decent for a direct-to-video movie. The reasons being for what's going on is a little bit shaky. Like, okay, this meteor is made of gold. How is this meteor made of gold? And how'd that come about? And, okay, this guy hypnotized everybody. And what do you do? Keep them all fed? And there's a lot of questions that are get raised by that. But, you know, it's Scooby-Doo animated film. You're not looking that deep into it, I guess. Overall, like I said, it was a time waster. Nice kind of step a toe back into the Scooby-Doo world. Because, like, there was a time in my life where I was just obsessed with Scooby-Doo. And then that kind of waned throughout the years. But, you know, it's a nice step a toe back. It'd be nice, I think Scooby-Doo Where Are You did get on Blu-ray. But it'd be nice if a lot of those one-season shots of the Scooby-Doo characters would get better physical releases. I would pick them up. But and you know, bring back Scrappy-Doo. And if you think he's annoying, then just rewrite the character to make him more tolerable. If you need to fix the character, then fix the character. Just saying. So anyway, with that said, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.